Welcome! I have prepared some really amazing, interesting historical photos. These are real historical shots. Let's go. This sealed truck is a German gas van used at Colonial in occupied Poland in the early 1940s. It was modified so engine exhaust flowed into the closed cargo box, turning the vehicle itself into a mobile killing chamber. In Londonderry, a masked man holding a rifle is handed tea and biscuits by local women during the Unrest of 1972. It captures how normal routines and street patrols mixed during the Troubles. In 1989, about 2 million people joined hands to form the Baltic Way, a human chain stretching roughly 600 kilometers across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. During United States Prohibition from 1920 to 1933, smugglers drove trucks over the frozen Detroit River to move banned drink from Canada into Detroit. In August 1991, the cargo ship Vlora arrived in Bari, packed with about 20,000 Albanians, fleeing the sudden breakdown of their country's communist system. Italy rushed many into the city's stadium because there was nowhere else to hold a crowd that size. This is John B. Calhoun's Mouse Utopia enclosure at the United States National Institute of Mental Health, built in the 1960s to test what crowding does to behavior. Even with constant food, water, and nesting space, overcrowding drove social collapse. In Rodell, West Virginia, 42-year-old miner Jack Smith is pushed in a wheelchair by his 16-year-old daughter Donna after a roof collapse crushed his legs only 1 year into mine work. He waited 18 years for workers' compensation. Smoke pours from a Greyhound bus near Anniston, Alabama, in May 1961, during the Freedom Riders campaign against segregated interstate travel. Men accused of supporting the Mau Mau uprising sit behind barbed wire in a Nairobi detention camp during Britain's crackdown in 1952. Tens of thousands of Kenyans were held in this camp system, and historians still argue over how much abuse. In Boston in September 1974, Valerie Banks was the only student who showed up for geography class on the first day after court-ordered busing began. The photo became a symbol of Boston's busing crisis. The flash froze heavy rain into bright streaks as a man ran through Wellington at night in September 1974, in a case later reported as a Soviet intelligence escape attempt. This is a Cold War checkpoint outside a nuclear power plant, where entry was controlled like a military site. At the same time, civil defense pamphlets told families to seal rooms with plastic and tape and live on canned food after radioactive fallout. Sydney police photographed 4 robbery suspects on July 20, 1921, writing each man's name and the date above his head like a courtroom label. The tailored suits and hats show how early mugshots could look like office portraits. In Norway in 1910, workers cut perfect ice blocks from a frozen lake with long saws to stockpile winter cold for summer. The blocks were packed in sawdust and stored in ice houses, so this frozen harvest could chill food and beer months later. In late 1979 California, bodybuilders Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu stroll the street looking like off-duty action figures years before Schwarzenegger became a global movie star. In July 1959 in Leningrad, United States Vice President Richard Nixon stepped under a fountain at the Hermitage and drank while Soviet officials watched. It happened during the American National Exhibition visit. At Celilo Falls on the Columbia River around 1920, fishermen used long dip nets and spears to grab salmon as they rocketed up the rapids. This ancient fishery was later drowned by the Dalles Dam in 1957, erasing the falls and a major native trading hub. In Berlin in 1945, Soviet soldiers climbed the shattered Reichstag and covered its stone columns with their names, cities, and unit notes, like a giant victory guest book. Some marks include ZOS, the Ground Aircraft Support Service. During a lunch break at the Nuremberg trials in 1945, several defendants sit with metal trays while one man blocks the camera with his hand. The plain crackers and bread on the table show how tightly controlled and routine this world-famous post-war tribunal became day to day. This is a German trench excavator from 1918, a tracked machine with a giant bucket wheel meant to chew through earth far faster than shovels. It shows how World War I turned digging into industrial engineering. Near Rogachev, a Red Army soldier uses his fallen horse as cover while aiming a rifle across open ground. The photo shows how Eastern Front fighting turned even an animal into improvised protection when there was nowhere else to hide. This frame shows the Trinity test fireball just 0.016 seconds after detonation, already forming a smooth dome of superheated plasma. The glowing sphere was about 200 meters wide, expanding faster than sound. In Sweden in 1908, a trained moose named Stolta is harnessed to a cart like a horse, showing a real early experiment in moose driving. Swedes later tested moose as possible cavalry or draft animals because they handle deep snow and cold far better than horses. In the Second Boer War in 1902, the armored train Harry Mary protected its locomotive with thick ship ropes instead of steel plates. The tangled cable mass was meant to soak up bullets and fragments. In 1901, the electrophone let subscribers hear live theater and concerts through a telephone line using early headphones like these. For a yearly fee, people could listen from home decades before radio broadcasting became common. At Margate Lido in England in 1947, a perfect figure contest made contestants wear face masks, so judges scored only posture and body proportions. The seaside venue later ran similar gimmick contests like Best Legs. A South Vietnamese soldier salutes an Australian airman on a Vietnam War airfield, showing the height gap between a ground fighter and a flight-suited pilot. Australia sent troops and squadrons to Vietnam from 1962 to 1973. Over Britain in 1940, anti-aircraft guns fired tracer rounds that drew bright arcs across the night sky during Luftwaffe raids in the Blitz. Those streaks were also a crude aiming guide, letting crews walk their fire toward bombers they often could not even see. In 1962, New York small business owners staged a mock funeral to protest being forced out for the future World Trade Center site. They accused the Port Authority of using condemnation to bury shops. In June 1944, United States soldiers in Cherbourg inspect seized French wine bottles just days after the Normandy landings. Cherbourg's deep water port became a key Allied supply lifeline once captured. This is a Bourdais, a half-underground dugout home photographed in Hungary in 1976, with an earth roof for natural insulation. By sinking the walls into soil, families could stay warmer in winter and cooler in summer, using almost no building materials. During filming of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Steven Spielberg told extras giving the dictatorship-era salute to secretly cross their fingers behind their backs. It was a quiet, "I do not mean this" signal, so the crowd could act the scene without feeling like they were endorsing it. In 1957, Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, sketched the Grinch while finishing How the Grinch Stole Christmas, shaping the scowl and spiky fur that became the character's signature. In 1941, a Texaco station worker flips the price board to 16.5 cents per gallon for regular gasoline. The huge sign was made for drivers passing fast, and it shows how fuel prices were still tracked by hand long before digital pumps. In 1999, an elderly woman walks away from a destroyed neighborhood with rolled rugs on her back and a framed portrait as her only cargo. Rugs were often the quickest salvage because they were warmth. Dutch sentries stand knee-deep in a water barrier in 1939, guarding a flooded defense line built to stop vehicles. The Netherlands relied on controlled inundation for centuries, turning flat land into a deliberate moat before the Second World War. In Glasgow on March 18, 1941, British police and officers pose beside a diffused Luftwaffe parachute mine, a weapon designed for sea use but dropped on cities. Its huge blast could tear roofs off and break windows across whole blocks. In 1903, the Krukov Canal in St. Petersburg overflowed and turned the street into a wide sheet of water, with telegraph poles rising like markers. Photographer Carl Bulla captured the flood as the city's stone facades became a shoreline. In Seattle in December 1942, a Boeing worker tests a wiring harness for a B-17F Flying Fortress before it is installed in the bomber. That spiderweb of cables could decide whether guns, radios, and engine controls worked at altitude. This is the Louisiana Purchase Treaty signed in 1903, the document that sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States for $15 million. The deal nearly doubled the country's size, adding about 828,000 square miles of land in one stroke. In Merseyside in 1942, Royal Home Guard volunteers load a Z-battery anti-aircraft rocket, Britain's cheap answer to night raids. These launchers fired salvos of unguided rockets to flood the sky with bursts. In September 1943 near Sicily, Allied troops posed on a captured Italian Cant Zipa 501 Gabbiano floatplane, still sitting on its boat-like hull. The flying boat could loiter for long patrols over sea lanes, which is why intact captures were prized for study. In the Wenau Forest in 1944, a United States First Army 105mm howitzer crew loads a shell while the gun recoils into smoke and flying dirt. This 105 was the workhorse of American field artillery. On January 17, 1991, Israeli families put on gas masks at home as Iraq launched Scud missiles during the Gulf War. Fearing chemical warheads, people sealed rooms with plastic and tape and waited for the all-clear in sealed rooms. A Women's Auxiliary Air Force wireless operator listens to Morse code on headphones and writes it down at a radio desk during the Second World War. These operators handled time-critical traffic for air defense and raids. In Mulhouse, France in 1944, Moroccan soldiers serving with French forces dragged down a German regime flag after the city was retaken. It is a sharp reminder that colonial troops fought and died in Europe. In 1908, a single open-top car drives the Long Island Motor Parkway, one of America's first limited-access toll roads built for wealthy motorists. The concrete ribbon runs arrow-straight toward the faint Manhattan skyline. At Cardington in England, passengers climb onto a giant British airship using a mooring mast, essentially a flying liner docked like a ship. After the R-101 crash in 1930, this whole dream of regular long-distance airship travel in Britain collapsed almost overnight. In Los Angeles, Elton John takes a kick in full soccer kit, while football legend George Best watches with teammates in the background. It is a perfect time capsule of 1970s celebrity crossover. In 1936, Dorothea Lange photographed pea pickers beside a homemade house car, a patched truck turned into a moving shelter. This rolling shack was Depression survival gear, built from scrap so families could chase short harvest jobs without renting a room. In 1953 in Germany, NSU showed a double scooter concept. Two Lambretta-style bodies joined into one tiny microcar for 2 adults and 2 children. It claimed about 78 kilometers per hour and roughly 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers. In 1954, kids kneel at the fireplace with a toy microphone, broadcasting as they wait for Santa to come down the chimney. In New York City in 1949, German-born giant Jacob Nacken dressed as Santa, standing 7 feet 8 inches tall. His height made department store Santa look like a real myth on 2 legs, towering over every doorway. In 1965, some Mercedes cars were fitted with a Fidelity console that stacked a small television, a car phone handset, and a radio in the cabin. It was a rolling luxury lounge with a chilled compartment for drinks. On May 5, 1961, at Cape Canaveral, Alan Shepard is strapped into Freedom 7 minutes before launch, becoming the first American in space. His Mercury flight lasted about 15 minutes and reached roughly 187 kilometers in altitude. Berlin, 1937. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels leads the regime salute at a state Christmas party while his young daughters copy the gesture at the table. In London in 1908, a firefighter wears a smoke helmet an early breathing system with a hose-fed mask and a pack on his back. Before modern self-contained air tanks, this gear was a lifeline in thick smoke, but could snag or fail in tight rooms. In 1990, refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh set up a tent camp right beside Red Square with St. Basil's Cathedral in the background. They camped in the capital's center because it was the one place authorities and cameras could not ignore. This image is often shared as the school children's blizzard of January 12, 1888, when a sudden whiteout trapped many students and teachers on the Great Plains. On a United States Navy cruiser in 1942, sailors line up for payday and receive cash at a shipboard table like a floating bank. Most of that money could not be spent at sea, so crews often mailed it home or saved it for the next port. This is one of the Iwo Jima flag raisings in 1945, but it is not the famous staged photo that became the icon. 2 flags went up on Mount Suribachi that day. In Saigon in 1971, a United States airman walks hand in hand with his girlfriend through a street packed with jeeps, scooters, and sedans. The quiet Dayton uniform hits hard because it sits inside a war-zone city. This Harvard term bill ending in January 1869 totals about $170, listing tuition, room rent, and services. The line items include wood for fuel and Cambridge Gas Light Company charges for lighting. In 1952, a woman is photographed doing a straddle jump over 6 classmates lined shoulder to shoulder. The setup and uniforms suggest a staged physical education or gymnastics stunt shot rather than a spontaneous moment. In London in 1967, an actor in a Batman costume filmed a children's road safety short while walking kids across a street. The shot captures the real street setting, parked cars, row houses, and pedestrians, used as the set. Frank Herbert signs copies of Dune at a bookstore event in 1971. The table is stacked with multiple Dune editions, showing it was already being sold at scale. Kowloon Walled City in 1975. High-rises fused into one massive block with almost no light reaching the alleys. It became famous as one of the densest urban places on Earth, packed with homes, workshops, and improvised wiring. United States Marines line up for regulation haircuts in 1971, photographed by Eddie Adams. One head is already shaved to bare skin, while the rest wait shirtless in a tight row, a standard intake ritual to remove individuality. A soft focus color photo shows a young couple in formal wedding clothes, leaning in with their arms around each other. The image is captioned as a 1975 wedding day shot of Bill and Hillary Clinton. A huge nighttime crowd waves black, red, gold German flags in front of Berlin's Reichstag as floodlights and fireworks cut through smoke. The caption dates it to October 3, 1990, the day Germany formally reunified after 45 years of East-West division. 2 tractors at the top right cut tight contour furrows that curve with the slope, forming a field-long windbreak that helps keep topsoil from blowing away. Margaret Bourke White photographed this near Walsh, Colorado in 1954. This is a close-up of an Apple partnership document showing the signatures of Stephen G. Wozniak, Stephen P. Jobs, and Ronald G. Wayne. Ronald Wayne sold his 10% stake back in 1976 for $800. The aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CV-6, is being towed past the Manhattan skyline in August 1958 on its last trip to the scrapyard. Enterprise earned 20 battle stars and a Presidential Unit Citation. World War I soldiers sit in the mud with boots off, rubbing and airing out pale, swollen feet, while others crowd around in greatcoats and steel helmets. Keeping feet dry, warm, and regularly changing socks was standard field practice because prolonged wet and cold could cause trench foot and take men out of action. 2 Romani bear handlers walk along a rural road with 2 brown bears in Bulgaria, 1993. In the Balkans, traveling dancing bear acts trained bears to step to music during street performances. Primo Carnera, an Italian heavyweight boxer, poses with gloves on and his arms stretched wide beside 2 men. He held the world heavyweight title from June 29, 1933 to June 14, 1934. The Aerospatiale Alouette III combat helicopter of the Rhodesian Air Force during a fire operation in the 70s of the last century. The Alouette III is a light turbine helicopter that was often flown with the cockpit door open so that a crew member could fire from the side. Crowds pack outside the Reich Chancellery in Berlin as Adolf Hitler appears at a lit window on January 30, 1933. Shortly after President Paul von Hindenburg appointed him Chancellor. In March 1933, the Enabling Act let his cabinet pass laws without the Reichstag. An NYPD officer holds up an iron bar while an evidence voucher labeled Police Department City of New York is shown to the camera. The close-up documents a seized weapon and its official chain of custody paperwork. A lone U.S. Marine stands beside an American flag on the rocky summit of Mount Suribachi, with the beaches and landing ships spread out below. The flag was raised on Iwo Jima on February 23, 1945. A black and white photo shows an older couple seated in armchairs, the man leaning forward while the woman clasps her hands and reacts with her mouth open. The caption says they are Neil Armstrong's parents, watching the moon landing. An empty stage is shown with an overturned chair, a cloth on the floor, and chalk circles marking multiple holes on the painted backdrop. The caption identifies this as the Audubon Ballroom in New York City on February 21, 1965, just after Malcolm X was shot. A uniformed Montgomery police officer rolls a woman's fingers onto an ink pad at a booking desk, while an older man watches from a chair. The caption identifies her as Rosa Parks, being fingerprinted in Montgomery, Alabama, after she refused to give up her bus seat in December 1955. In March 1941, near Silver Lake, North Carolina, a woman in a plaid coat and a child pose in front of trailers beside a small seated mannequin at a traveling sideshow called the Crime Museum. Hand-painted boards in the foreground read Admission 10C and Joe Louis. Two hikers sit on a steep bare rock face on Satula Mountain in northern Georgia in 1929, looking out over layered ridge lines. The ridge drops sharply beside them, and a low bank of clouds hangs above the distant mountains. A statue of Martin Luther stands on a pedestal in front of the ruined Frauenkirche in Dresden, with collapsed masonry piled across the church site. Only fragments of the outer walls and the dome's upper structure remain intact. Open-topped freight wagons are packed shoulder to shoulder with men, with a small group of uniformed guards standing on the platform beside the tracks. The cars have no visible seating or shelter. A long row of men lies face down on a dirt courtyard, while several armed soldiers in steel helmets stand watching near a building entrance. The scene includes a wooden table with gear, buckets, and crates by the wall. A ship is seen from the stern as a massive wall of rough sea rises behind it, with spray exploding into the air. The wave towers above the ship's upper decks and mast, showing open ocean conditions strong enough to overwhelm the vessel's height. In a January 1975 photo from The Hague, Netherlands, a woman speaks at an anti-Vietnam War conference. Multiple microphones crowd the table in front of her, and a large Vietnam banner hangs behind her. Men in uniform work inside a wooden barrack, weaving straw into shoes at the Zossen prisoner of war camp in Germany during the World War I in 1914. Bundles of straw cover the floor, and a cast-iron stove stands at the right. 4 armed American soldiers in wide-brim hats stand guard, while several captured men are held behind a rope line in a scrubby outdoor camp. The scene is labeled as from the Mexican expedition in Mexico in 1916, when United States troops pursued Pancho Villa's forces and took prisoners. A lone man stands in a landscape of flattened debris with the ruined Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, later known as the Genbaku Dome, rising in the background. Several men sit on the porch of the Coal City Club in Coal City, West Virginia, beneath painted signs advertising beer, Coca-Cola, and Royal Crown Cola. Their bent backs and wide-legged posture are clearly visible as they rest on the railing. This is a grainy newspaper-style portrait of a man in a dark hat and jacket, printed inside a rectangular border. The caption beneath the photo reads, "John Wesley, aged 28, and says he was hanged in Arkansas in 1901. Mary Breckinridge founded the Frontier Nursing Service in Kentucky in 1925, sending nurse midwives by horse and wagon to reach isolated Appalachian homes like this one. In some districts, the trip to a patient took several hours over mountain roads. In 1940, Hattie McDaniel became the first African American to win an Academy Award, earning Best Supporting Actress for playing Mammy in Gone with the Wind. Even on that historic night, she was required to sit at a separate table away from most guests. 4 elderly women pose at a convention of formerly enslaved people in Washington, District of Columbia. These meetings were used to demand federal pensions and public recognition decades after emancipation. On March 3, 1913, suffrage leader Inez Milholland Boissevin rode a white horse at the head of the Washington District of Columbia parade, staged the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. Her dramatic Joan of Arc look was meant to force headlines. On June 9, 1945, soldiers of the United States Army 96th Infantry Division advance up Big Apple Hill on Okinawa, working their rifles while climbing exposed rock. The oddly cheerful hill nickname marked a key piece of high ground in the push toward the Shuri defenses. On December 6, 1969, Hell's Angels hired as security clash with concertgoers using pool cues at the Altamont Free Concert in California. The chaos unfolded during a Rolling Stones show, and the photo became a symbol of how fast the 1960s dream could unravel. On July 12, 1967, unrest erupted in Newark, New Jersey after the reported beating of a black taxi driver by police, and a National Guardsman faces shouting residents in this street scene. The 6-day Newark uprising left 26 people dead and hundreds injured. Ralph W. Lobaugh is pictured leaving prison in Indiana in 1977 after about 30 years behind bars for 3 killings he did not commit, carrying his shoes, coat, and a few books. The case is known for his voluntary false confessions. Photographed near Scranton, Pennsylvania, in 1902, these girls worked in a squib factory making tiny ignition fuses for anthracite coal mines. Nancy Green, the original Aunt Jemima brand ambassador, was signed to a long-term contract and toured the United States as a paid spokesperson until her death in 1923 at age 89. This store photo captures how early mass advertising turned one performer into a national symbol seen by crowds coast to coast. Time balls were first used as public time signals so sailors could set ship chronometers by watching a ball drop at an exact hour. On December 31, 1907, Times Square debuted an electrically lit 700-pound iron ball after New York City banned fireworks. In April 1975, a South Vietnamese pilot flew a tiny Cessna 01 Bird Dog onto the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Midway after dropping a note asking for room to land with his family. Captain Lawrence Chambers ordered several helicopters pushed into the sea to clear the deck. On March 7, 1948, children in Hiroshima hold chunks of rock and debris from shattered buildings, documented 3 years after the atomic bombing. The handwritten caption links the rubble to the blast itself. Crowds gather in Monongah, West Virginia after the December 6, 1907 Fairmont Coal Company mine accident, often cited as the largest loss of life in United States mining history. The official count was 362 men. This post shows the old Wilson store in Boissevin, a rare snapshot of a small-town building that served as both a downstairs shop and an upstairs home for years. The people lined up on the porch and the goods in the windows capture how one address could be a family business, a meeting spot. A dust storm blankets Amarillo, Texas in April 1936, turning midday streets into a gray wall that hides buildings just a block away. This was the Dust Bowl era, when wind-blown topsoil from dried-out plains repeatedly shut down towns and forced families to flee. Lewis Hine photographed 12-year-old Johns Lewis in Chester, South Carolina, one of many children working in cotton mills in the early 1900s. In this era, long shifts and lint-filled air were common inside mills. Before the next interesting photo, I would like to ask you to write in the comments about the photo that you liked the most and why. But we continue. In 1936, President Franklin D. Roosevelt visited a farmer in Mandan, North Dakota, who had received federal drought relief during the Dust Bowl crisis. The stop was part of Roosevelt's strategy to sell New Deal aid face-to-face. In November 1952, Lieutenant R.P. Yateman from the aircraft carrier USS Bonhomme Richard attacks a bridge in Korea with rockets and bombs. The photo freezes the instant the first blast blooms beside the span. This is Elizabeth Plain, photographed in 1886 after moving from Cornwall to northern Queensland, Australia, as the daughter of a copper miner. She was widowed 4 times before age 40 and raised 3 children. This World War I trench raider is geared for night raids with a face mask, goggles, and a mix of close-range weapons for silent fighting in narrow trenches. Both sides formed small volunteer teams to slip into forward lines, seize maps, or prisoners. In 1955, Amish men in Pennsylvania were jailed for refusing to send their children to high school under state compulsory education rules. The conflict helped fuel the legal fight that later reached the United States Supreme Court. Virginia Portocarrero served in Italy as a volunteer nurse with the Brazilian Expeditionary Force during 1943 to 1945, pictured here in uniform on a rooftop. In 1958, a young BBC producer shows a white cockatoo to 2 royal children, using a live bird to grab their attention in seconds. The photo catches the early era of wildlife television, before he became the famous narrator of global nature series. In 1961, a Soviet boy holds up a newspaper announcing Yuri Gagarin's spaceflight to an elderly shepherd in a village orchard. The moment shows how the first human orbit reached even people far from radios, delivered by a single printed page. In 1954, photographer Inga Morath captured an Irish traveler family in Killorglin, County Kerry, posed beside their painted wagon and horse on the roadside. At Francisco Franco's funeral in 1975, Chile's ruler, Augusto Pinochet, sits beside Imelda Marcos, the wife of Philippine leader Ferdinand Marcos. The photo shows how authoritarian leaders and their circles gathered in public ceremony. These bumper cars sit in the Pripyat amusement park, built for May Day in 1986, but never opened because the city was evacuated days earlier. The silent Ferris wheel behind them became a worldwide symbol of Chernobyl's sudden stop. In 1944, Helen Keller visited wounded soldiers at a military hospital in Texas, accompanied by her interpreter, Anne Sullivan Macy. The photo captures her using touch to connect with a patient, the same method she relied on for communication and public speeches. In 1918, workers stacked sandbags against the portals of Notre Dame de Paris to shield its carved stonework from wartime damage. The photo shows a cathedral treated like a frontline asset, protected with the same emergency materials used for trenches. In January 1920, a man feeds pigeons outside St. Paul's Cathedral in the City of London, letting them perch on his arms and shoulder. The foggy street behind him captures post-war London when birds, soot, and mist were part of the daily skyline. A London cafe owner writes a wartime notice promising the cafe will stay open even in the event of invasion, closing only briefly. The sign captures the civilian mindset of the 1940s. Keep serving tea, whatever happens. On May 2, 1992, a California National Guard soldier escorts a surfer off closed Venice Beach during the Los Angeles Unrest. The surreal pairing of a surfboard and a rifle shows how fast ordinary city life was put under military control. At the 1952 Olympics, Luxembourg's Josie Barthel wins the 1,500 meters and cries on the top step as the medalists line up. Organizers did not have Luxembourg's anthem, so the band had to improvise it on the spot. 4 generations of one family pose with their service symbols, each tied to a different United States war: the American Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. The picture compresses roughly 80 years of conflict into one frame. These 2 photos show the Great Sphinx of Giza, before and after major excavation, when wind-blown sand had buried much of its body up to the neck. After the sand was cleared, the full lion body and paws were revealed. During the American Civil War, Frances Quinn repeatedly disguised herself as a man and enlisted 5 separate times, serving in both infantry and cavalry units. She was wounded at the Battle of Stones River in 1862 before being discovered and dismissed again. In 1940, Ida Mae Fuller of Ludlow, Vermont, received Social Security check number 00000001, the first monthly benefit ever paid. She had paid into the new system for only a few years, then collected payments for decades. In 1936, a migrant family from drought-stricken Oklahoma camps by the roadside near Blythe, California, during the Dust Bowl exodus. The color photo shows their entire home reduced to bedding under a tarp. A British cavalry sergeant major demonstrates bayonet charge technique to an American trainee at Camp Dick in Texas during World War I-era training. The lesson shows how close combat drills were still taken seriously even as machine guns and artillery dominated the battlefield. In 1886, on Staten Island, New York, showman Buffalo Bill Cody poses with Pawnee and Sioux performers from his Wild West show. The staged lineup reveals how indigenous people were paid to reenact their own cultures for East Coast crowds under a show business spotlight. In November 1864, in Dutch Gap, Virginia, soldiers of the African American Union took aim from cover during the fighting near the James River. Their presence marks a change at the end of the war, when United States troops were deployed in large numbers. In November 1961, this is the southern coast of New Guinea, where Michael Rockefeller disappeared after leaving a stalled boat and attempting to swim toward shore. A large Dutch-led search by ships and aircraft found no trace. This photo shows a long gasoline line during the 1973 to 1974 oil crisis, when fuel shortages and rationing fears clogged stations across the United States. The crisis was triggered by an OPEC oil embargo. Detroit, Michigan, 1932. Children press to the window as a charity worker arrives with stacked Christmas parcels during the Great Depression. The scene captures how relief groups delivered gifts door to door when many families could not afford even basic holiday presents. New York City, 1920. Immigrants at Ellis Island eat their first Christmas dinner in the United States at long communal tables. The shared meal marked the end of medical inspections and paperwork for many families. Inside a Pan Am Boeing 747 economy cabin in the 1970s, passengers eat full tray meals while a flight attendant works the aisle. The wide-body jumbo jet era packed hundreds on board and helped make long-distance flying a mainstream middle-class habit. A Fort Worth, Texas laundromat in the 1950s filled with rows of metal washtubs and overhead pipes running the length of the room. The numbered stations show how laundry was organized like an assembly line before home washing machines became common. Pittsburgh, 1940s. A steel worker's child drinks from a dipper beside a coal stove in a cramped kitchen. The soot-stained room and heavy stovepipe show how industrial cities carried their smoke indoors as well as outside. At Fort Des Moines, soldiers of the 17th Provisional Training Regiment pose on a mock Quattro plane, a wooden trainer used to practice balance and coordination before real aircraft time. The handwritten caption hints at the World War I rush to teach aviation skills with improvised ground rigs. Hyde Park, London, 1972. British schoolgirls protest corporal punishment with a sign reading, "No to the cane." The march shows students pushing back publicly against a school practice that was still legal in many places. In late May 1986, Yugoslav People's Army Reserve officer trainees pose on a T-34-85 tank during training, with their weapons laid out in front. The image shows how World War II-era armor stayed in service for decades. Algiers, 1960. A French soldier faces a street packed with Algerian demonstrators demanding an end to French rule. 2 years later, Algeria won independence, and scenes like this became proof that the empire was cracking in real time. In the 1980s, the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen paraded a Scud tactical missile launcher alongside a 9K-52 Luna-M artillery rocket system, both mounted on huge multi-axle trucks. The display shows how Cold War hardware was exported worldwide. Wrocław, Poland, 1967. A man calmly feeds pigeons, letting two perch on his hand while the flock swirls at his boots. Shot by photographer Richard Peter, the scene turns a bare city courtyard into a quiet stage of trust between human and birds. On January 17, 1945, a gun crew of the 311th Field Artillery Battalion rests in Betschdorf, France, near the German border, warming hands over a small fire. The photo shows frontline routine between missions, helmets on, maps and letters out. Jefferson Shields is photographed in the early 1900s wearing reunion ribbons and medals, remembered as the personal attendant to Colonel James Kerr Edmondson of the 27th Virginia Infantry. On January 12, 1943, Nikola Tesla's casket lies in a New York funeral hall, draped with the flags of the United States and Yugoslavia. The inventor died alone and nearly broke, but this ceremony shows how quickly his work was claimed as national legacy. In 1912, Venetia Stanley stands beside Clementine Churchill in a studio portrait, years before Clementine became the wife of Britain's wartime prime minister. Venetia later received a flood of intensely personal letters from Prime Minister H.H. Asquith during World War I. This portrait shows United States Senator Benjamin Tillman in 1910, a South Carolina power broker who pushed laws that enforced racial segregation and stripped many black citizens of voting rights. October 15, 1978. Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev stands with party comrades beside a jeep on a hunting trip at the Zalesye farm near Kiev in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The captions detail that a young taxi driver moonlighted as his chauffeur. On May 5, 1939, Eva Braun films Germany's leader talking with Hermann Esser and physician Theodor Morell on the Berghof terrace. This private footage shows the inner circle's relaxed staging just months before Europe entered a global conflict. 17-year-old Sergeant William Ambler, born in Salem, New York in September 1845, is shown in uniform, writing often to his younger brother Louis. He was killed by artillery fire on July 2, 1863, at Gettysburg. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his last known photograph, taken on April 11, 1945, the day before he died. The tired posture and heavy eye circles match his final months leading the United States through the closing phase of World War II. New York City, 1888. The great blizzard buries streets and storefronts under towering snowbanks. The storm paralyzed transport and helped push cities toward underground rail lines and modern weather forecasting. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, Henri Giraud, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Charles de Gaulle, and Winston Churchill posed together while planning Allied strategy in North Africa. The meeting produced the unconditional surrender policy for Germany, Italy, and Japan. William Almas, born in Ontario, Canada, enlisted in the Union Army on August 22, 1861, by lying about his age and joined the 7th Michigan Infantry. He was killed at Gettysburg on July 3, 1863, aged 18. Kabul, 1992. A Jamiat-e-Islami fighter rides atop a captured Soviet armored vehicle as the communist government collapses. This moment marks the Mujahideen takeover that quickly fractured into civil war between rival factions in the capital. Myeongdong refugee camp in Seoul, photographed in 1954, housed thousands displaced by the Korean War, with rows of military tents packed into an open plaza. A helmeted soldier kneels beside a tall mortar tube while a small girl kisses him goodbye, with onlookers gathered behind them. The photo is widely captioned as Iraq at the start of the Iran-Iraq War in 1980, freezing a family moment inside a mobilizing battlefield. These are glass plate tattoo studies made in London in 1905 by Sutherland MacDonald, one of Britain's first professional tattoo artists. The left man wears a full-body dragon, while the right shows a dense heraldic crest. A uniformed man accepts a book or document from a suited man inside an ornate room in a photo dated 1980. The caption identifies them as Egypt's president and Professor Menachem Milson, placing this in the immediate aftermath of the Egypt-Israel peace treaty era. In the Netherlands in 1959, a packed underground escalator turns into a moving bike lane as commuters push their bicycles through the station. This rare scene shows how everyday travel here was already built around bikes as the default, not the exception. During the Dust Bowl years in the United States, families often turned plain flour sacks into shirts and dresses because the cotton cloth was one of the few things they could still get. In the early 1960s, the Flintstones aired in prime time and even stopped for integrated ads where Fred and Barney held a Winston pack on screen. It is a sharp time capsule of how a family cartoon once helped sell an adult tobacco product. In 1963, Jim Henson tests Rolf the dog, the first Muppet to become a real television star and a regular sidekick on The Jimmy Dean Show. This behind-the-scenes moment shows how Henson made a cloth character feel alive with tiny hand moves and perfect timing. In 1934, the Rockefeller Center tree was still a simple, real evergreen lit with small bulbs, long before giant theme designs and massive sponsor builds. It was only the third year of the tradition. Crete, 1941. Greek resistance men pose with rifles and binoculars as German forces moved onto the island during the Second World War. Cretan resistance became known for civilians joining in, and the struggle on Crete kept going long after the first landing. In 1899, a Maricopa woman poses with a large woven tray balanced on her head, showing the steady posture used for carrying loads over long distances in the desert. The Maricopa people lived along the Gila River in Arizona and were famous for skilled basket weaving. During the Second World War, German soldiers display a captured Soviet propaganda banner showing a caricature of Hitler with the German line, "Winter quarters for the German army are ready." Late August 1918. British soldiers of the North Staffordshire Regiment moved through Bilajari Station near Baku, guarding a key rail line to the Caspian oil region during the chaos at the end of the First World War. In 1925, this is the inside of a poor Komsomol member's wooden hut. One rough room where a table, bench bed, and a hanging coat share the same space. The single portrait on the wall and the bare floorboards show how Soviet youth activism often ran on belief. In Brest, France in 1944, U-boat commander Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock pauses on the dock to feed the 9th Flotilla's mascot goat, wearing a small blanket with the unit emblem. Mascots like this were taken aboard to lift morale on long patrols. In 1917, women from Russia's Women's Battalion swear an oath in a crowded square, a rare moment when female volunteers were sent to the front to raise morale after months of collapse. The unit was created during the Provisional Government. In the United States in the 1930s, Max Factor applies makeup for the camera, helping turn studio lighting and film stock into a new standard of beauty. His Hollywood lab pioneered screen-specific products like pancake makeup. Charleston, South Carolina in the 1860s. Volunteer firefighters pose in tall leather helmets with a hand trumpet used to shout orders and clear streets before sirens existed. Many crews were social clubs as much as emergency teams. Germany, 1936. A girl calmly handles what looks like a tame wolf or wolf dog, an animal that is far harder to keep than a dog because it stays strong-willed and alert. Photos like this were often staged for curiosity shows or private collections. North Carolina, 1971 to 1972. Alex Harris captures a weathered shack, a laundry line, and a stranded sedan sunk into mud, all in one quiet frame. In rural America like this, the car often meant access to food, work, school, and help. Silas Kooistra, born in the Netherlands on February 8, 1841, served in the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry and was wounded in the thigh at Gettysburg on July 1, 1863. He died from infection on July 30, 1863, at only 22 years old. Summer 1954, in Kyoto, Japan, Richard Feynman stands with Hideki Yukawa, the Nobel-winning physicist who first proposed the meson to explain the force holding atomic nuclei together. Tehran, Mehrabad Airport, January 16, 1979. An Iranian soldier bends to kiss the shoes of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the monarch prepares to leave the country for exile. 2 weeks later, the revolution's momentum made his return impossible. This photo is tied to the Blanche Monnier case in France, where a young woman was kept hidden inside her family home for about 25 years after a blocked marriage. Police found her alive in 1901 after an anonymous letter. Write your opinion about the video in the comments. I remind you that I personally select these historical photos, and I think they are really interesting. I would like to hear your opinion. Thank you, friends.